The morning she found the surveyor's stakes in her kitchen garden, Marian did not go to the house to complain. She pulled one stake free, turned it in her fingers, read the ribbon tied to it, the Duke of Ashmore's personal cipher, stamped in wax, and drove it back into the earth with the heel of her boot. Then she went inside, washed her hands, and began the quarterly accounts, because the quarterly accounts were due, and because there were exactly 31 days before the November audit that would determine whether the Dower Cottage's lease converted to a permanent endowment or reverted in full to the Ashmore estate. She did not yet know what the surveyor's stakes would cost her. Had she known, she would have pulled them all the same. The cottage had been her domain for 3 years. The Duke of Ashmore, her husband by contract and by law and by almost nothing else, had installed her there the week after the wedding and departed for his principal seat 4 counties away, where a woman named Sylvie Renault occupied the east wing with a retinue of 12 and the run of the formal gardens. Marian had received a banker's draft for household maintenance and a letter of 3 sentences. The letter informed her that the estate manager would call on quarter days, that she was not to increase the household staff beyond 6, and that he trusted she would conduct herself with the discretion appropriate to her situation. She had read the letter twice, filed it, and gone to inspect the kitchen garden, which was a ruin. Now the kitchen garden fed 14 people, produced a surplus sold at market in the village of Cerney Cross, and had been written up anonymously in the proceedings of the County Horticultural Society. The accounts were in order because Marian kept them in order. The roof was sound because she had identified the weak timber herself and hired Potts the carpenter before the autumn rains. The still room yielded remedies she dispensed to the village without charge, which was perhaps why the village constable had shown a certain quiet friendliness when the matter of the stolen drainage tiles arose, and why Mrs. Hatch, who kept the inn, had sent her 4 pullets at Michaelmas with no note attached, as though a gift required no explanation between neighbors who understood each other. She was, in other words, invisible in precisely the way she had designed to be, unremarkable enough that no one thought to check whether she was flourishing. It was Potts who brought the real news, 3 days after the surveyor's stakes, arriving at the kitchen door with a look he usually reserved for a structural failure he'd known about for weeks, but hoped would resolve itself. He held his hat in both hands. The Duke, he said, was coming. The Duke was expected at the main house, Ashmore Park, a mile and a half up the hill, within a fortnight. Something had gone wrong, he'd heard, between His Grace and the woman in the East Wing. He didn't know the particulars, only that the housekeeper at the park had taken on extra staff, the East Wing had been shut and the shutters drawn, and there was to be a full review of estate accounts from every holding. Every holding, he repeated, meeting her eyes, meaning this one. Marian set down her pen. In 31 days, the November audit. In a fortnight, the Duke. She thanked Potts, gave him the list of things she needed from the timber merchant, and spent the evening at the desk with 3 years of ledgers arranged before her in order. They were impeccable. She knew they were impeccable. She had made them impeccable not from fear, but from habit, from the deep satisfaction of a thing correctly done. What she did not know, as she ran her finger down column after column of figures balanced to the penny, was that someone else had been in the accounts before her. Someone who had access to the estate's central register, and who had been making small adjustments, not to her books, which they could not touch, but to the estate's record of what her books contained. A discrepancy of a quarter's worth of income vanished from the estate copy as though she had never submitted it. The sort of discrepancy, inserted carefully over 6 months, that looked less like error and more like concealment. She did not know this yet. The audience at this moment knows what she does not, that the trap was already sprung, and she was only now walking toward it. Her name was Marian Castley, that had been, Marian Vane, that was by marriage, and she was 26. Her father had been a land surveyor, which was, she sometimes thought, the quiet irony at the bottom of the whole arrangement, and had left her 3 things when he died: his eye for a falsified measurement, his contempt for anyone who confused the price of a thing with its value, and an introduction, through a mutual solicitor, to the Duke of Ashmore's man of business. The Duke had wanted a quiet wife. She had wanted security and something useful to do. The contract had been explicit, businesslike, and signed by both parties in the presence of 2 witnesses. No one had spoken the word love. It had not, she had told herself, needed to enter the discussion. She no longer told herself that, but she kept the fact of it very still, in the way she kept other facts she did not intend to examine in daylight. The Duke arrived on a Thursday, 2 days earlier than the servants had predicted, and Marian learned of it the way she learned most things, by being in the kitchen garden when the carriage went past on the upper road, and by reading the crest on the door without appearing to look up from the asparagus bed she was edging. 4 horses. No outriders. No second carriage. He had come with considerably less ceremony than his station warranted, which meant he had come in a private temper rather than an official one, and private tempers were, in her experience, both more honest and more dangerous than public ones. He sent a note the following morning, formal, brief, and requesting that she attend him at Ashmore Park at 2:00 in the afternoon on the matter of the estate audit. He signed it Ashmore, without salutation. She sent back 3 lines. She would attend him at 2:00. She would bring the Dower Cottage accounts for the full period of her tenancy. She remained his obedient servant. She signed it Marian Vane, without address. Her ally in this, as in most practical matters, was Mrs. Barrow, who had been housekeeper at the cottage since before Marian's arrival, and who had initially regarded the new Duchess with the skepticism owed to any young woman who appeared to know nothing of running a house. Mrs. Barrow had revised this view on the day Marian identified, from the smell of the cellars, that the drainage tiles were not simply old but actively failing, and said so in plain terms to the man who had installed them, who was Mrs. Barrow's nephew. After that, Mrs. Barrow had transferred to Marian the sort of allegiance that an old soldier grants a new officer who turns out to know which end of a rifle works. She was waiting at the door when Marian came downstairs at 1:45, dressed for the visit with the accounts under her arm. "You'll want to know, Mrs.," Barrow said, "that the woman is gone. Miss Renault. Removed to London, they say, with her furniture. There was a settlement paid." She paused. "Paid from the Ashmore personal holdings, not the estate account. I thought you'd want to know that, too." Marian did not let her face report what she did with this information. "Thank you, Mrs. Barrow. There's also the matter of Mr. Farrow. That was the estate manager. He visited on quarter days, reviewed what she gave him to review, and departed. He had a soft voice, a smile of great regularity, and hands that never stilled, always moving, adjusting, resettling, as if he were perpetually arranging something just out of sight. What matter? He was at the park yesterday evening. For some time." Mrs. Barrow said it with the careful neutrality of a woman who has formed a strong opinion and is choosing to deliver only the facts. "I thought you'd want to know that as well." Marian thought about this all the way up the hill. Ashmore Park was a house that had been designed to make a person feel the appropriate scale of themselves. The drive was 3/4 of a mile and lined with beeches that had no interest in what passed beneath them, and the steps were 12 in number and unnecessarily wide. She climbed them at a pace she considered reasonable, was shown into a library she had never entered before, and waited. The room smelled of beeswax and old leather and something colder beneath, the particular cold of a house that had been closed and recently and incompletely reopened, as though it had not had time yet to decide whether it was welcoming anyone. The Duke of Ashmore came in without announcement, which she supposed was his prerogative in his own library, and she turned from the window where she had been studying the kitchen garden below, smaller than hers, she noted, and less well kept, and made a curtsy of the correct depth and no deeper. He was taller than she had remembered. She had seen him twice, at the introduction and at the wedding, both occasions of high formality and considerable distance. In person, in a morning coat that had been ridden in and not changed, he was a different proposition, still heavily built, with the kind of stillness that is not rest, but rather held force. His hair was dark and wanted cutting. His hands, she noticed, were a working man's hands on a duke's wrists, which told her a story about how he spent his time when he was not performing his rank. He looked at her with gray eyes that were doing something she recognized. They were reading her, the same way she was reading him, quietly and without appearing to. Lady Ashmore. He did not come forward to take her hand. Your Grace. She did not go forward either. A beat of silence, the kind that is not uncomfortable so much as deliberate, both of them, she thought, establishing something, though she could not yet say what. Then, he said, I understand you have brought the accounts, 3 years of them. I assumed a full review. Sit down, then. She sat. He remained standing for a moment, then appeared to reconsider, and took the chair across from her. The desk was between them, which was either significant or the only place to put 2 chairs in a room this size. There is a discrepancy, he said, between the figures in your quarterly submissions and the estate register. I know, Marian said. His eyes stilled. Whatever he had expected her to say, that was not it. I noticed it last night, she said, when I was preparing to come today. The estate register shows my 3rd quarter income 2 years ago as absent. I submitted it. I have the duplicate. Would you like to see it? She laid it on the desk between them. He looked at it without touching it for a moment, with the stillness of a man taking a blow without letting his face report it. Then he reached forward and read it in silence. The name on the receiving signature, he said. Farrow, the estate manager. Yes, he collected my submission in person that quarter. He was visiting on another matter. I believed he had submitted it with the others. She paused. I also noticed the discrepancy runs across 6 quarters in the estate register, which would suggest this is not a matter of a single misplaced document. Each time, the quarter when Mr. Farrow made his collection visit in person rather than receiving my submission by post. The Duke's expression was not anger. Anger, she thought, would have been easier. What was in his face was something colder and more controlled, the anger of a man who has been made a fool by someone he trusted and who is now doing rapid, precise arithmetic about how deeply the damage runs. His left hand rested on the desk, and she watched his fingers very slowly, press flat one by one. How long have you known? He said. Since last night. I had not noticed before, because I never saw the estate register, only my own copies. When your summons came, I checked both for the first time. He did not say he was sorry for doubting her. He said, instead, you have all the duplicates? Every submission for 3 years, with dated receipt signatures, filed in order. They are at the cottage. I did not know whether to bring them all, and did not wish to presume on your time, but they are available at whatever point you require them. He looked at her for a long time. She did not look away. There was a quality to the silence that had changed, though she could not exactly have named when it changed, sometime between the door and the desk. From the silence of 2 strangers at a negotiation to the silence of 2 people who have just discovered they are thinking the same thing. "Tell me about the estate," he said then, and his voice had changed too, the formal register reduced by 1 degree. "Not the accounts. The place." She told him. She told him about the drainage tiles and the kitchen garden and the surplus at Cern Cross Market, about the still room and Mrs. Hatch and the 4 pullets at Michaelmas, about the timber merchant and pots and the County Horticultural Society proceedings she had never claimed. She told him about the asparagus bed and the state of the fence on the north wall, and the drainage issue in the lower meadow that was, she thought, affecting the upper field's yield, and could probably be addressed for less than £20 if approached in March, rather than waiting until it became an emergency. She did not editorialize. She told him what she had observed, what she had done, what it had cost, and what it had returned. When she finished, he said, "The cottage is thriving. The cottage is in order." A pause. "You did not write to tell me. You did not ask." Something moved in his face, not quite a smile, but the structural preparation for one, a loosening around the mouth that vanished before it committed. "No," he said, "I did not ask." He stood. "I will need the full duplicate accounts. I would be grateful if you could send them by tomorrow. I will require some days to understand the extent of Pharaoh's." He stopped. The extent of it. She rose, gathered the ledger he was still not quite finished looking at, then stopped because he had picked it up to return it to her, and they were both briefly holding the same edge of the same document, which was not a thing she had planned. She released it. He looked down at her hands. She had ink on the second finger of her right hand, a perpetual condition. And then back at her face, with an expression she did not have a name for and carefully did not try to find one. "Thank you for coming," he said. "You requested it," she said. "Your Grace." On the walk back down the hill, she counted her steps because it was something to do with her mind besides think about the color of gray eyes in a library at 2 in the afternoon. The inquiry into Pharaoh's conduct began the following Monday. Marian knew it had begun, because Potts mentioned it in passing. The estate manager's ledgers had been collected from the park office. 2 men from the ducal solicitors had arrived from London on the morning coach, and Pharaoh himself had been seen at the inn at Cernicross in an advanced state of quiet agitation, drinking quantities of cider that a man of his profession had no business drinking on. A Tuesday. She filed this information beside the other things she was filing. She was aware that the November audit was now 22 days away, and that whatever Pharaoh had done with the estate register might, depending on how it was characterized, throw the entire audit into question, including the question of the cottage's endowment. She did not permit herself to think about what losing the endowment would mean. She had managed one crisis at a time for 3 years, and she saw no reason to revise the method now. On Wednesday, the Duke came to the cottage. He did not send a note. He arrived mid-morning in a coat that was, again, functional rather than formal, and she was in the still room doing inventory when Mrs. Barrow appeared in the doorway with a look of extraordinary composure that meant she was deeply interested in what was about to happen. "His Grace," she said, "is in the garden." Marian set down the jar she was cataloging, wiped her hands, and went out. He was standing at the edge of the asparagus bed, looking at it with an attention she recognized, the particular focus of someone calculating rather than admiring. He heard her step on the gravel and turned. "Forgive the intrusion." "I was reviewing the lower field and thought." He stopped. Restarted. "I wanted to see it." The garden. It is not much to look at in October. The structure is evident. The beds are sensibly placed for drainage. He looked at her. "Your father was a surveyor." It was not a question. He had read something. "Yes, the lower field drainage issue you described. The fall is to the southeast, not the southwest." The improvement you proposed would need to account for that. She blinked. Then she looked at the field, and she thought about it, and she said, "You're right. 20 pounds wouldn't do it. More like 35, but the yield improvement over 3 years would more than recover it. 40, I think, if we do it properly." She said, before she could stop herself. He did not appear to notice, or chose to appear not to notice. "Walk with me," he said, which was neither a question nor precisely a command, and she found herself doing it, the two of them moving along the garden's north wall, while he looked at the fence and she told him what each repair had cost and when, and he asked questions that assumed she knew the answers, which she did. They were at the end of the wall, in the corner where the old apple tree grew that produced an unremarkable apple, but excellent cider, before either of them said anything that was not about the garden. "Pharaoh has been with the estate 14 years, he said. "I know. He was recommended by my father's man of business. I have never had reason," he stopped. His jaw was set, and she could see him deciding how much to say. "I was not here," he said. "I did not oversee things as I should have. The situation with—" He stopped again. She noted, with the precision that had kept her sane for 3 years, that he did not say her name. "I was elsewhere for a considerable time. Things were left to manage themselves. Things," she said carefully, "generally manage themselves toward the interest of whoever is present." A pause. "That is an exceedingly diplomatic way to say what you mean. I have been practicing diplomacy." He turned to look at her, and again there was that structural, almost smile, and again it pulled back before arriving. "Were you angry?" he said, "when you came here?" She thought about how to answer this with honesty and without damage. "I was practical. I had made a contract. The terms were clear. I chose to meet my side of them thoroughly, because that is my nature, and because I had nowhere else to be and nothing else to do with my time. That is also a diplomatic answer." "Yes," she said, "but it is true." The apple tree had one late fruit on it, improbably holding on into October. He reached up, not quite without thinking, and pressed it gently with one finger to test it. It held. He left it where it was. She watched his hands, and then made herself stop watching his hands. "There is a thing I need to tell you," he said, "about the Pharaoh matter. Not today. I don't yet have all the documentation I require. But I want you to know there is more to it than the accounts, and I intend to lay it before you when I do." "I will be here," she said. "I know," he said, and then he went, walking back up the hill with the stride of a man who has somewhere to be, and she stood in the corner by the apple tree and looked at the spot where he had been and told herself a number of sensible things about contracts and practical arrangements and the importance of not mistaking professional competence for anything warmer, and believed approximately none of them. The soft blow arrived on a Friday, 10 days before the November audit, delivered so gently she almost missed it. She was at the inn in Cerney Cross to collect a package from the mail coach when she heard Pharaoh's voice from the back room. Not raised. Never raised. That was his gift. Speaking to a man she recognized as one of the junior grooms from the park. What she heard, standing very still beside the postal counter, was this: that the Duchess had known about the ledger discrepancies for considerably longer than a day. That there was evidence she had benefited from them, a direction of the surplus income. She would find the trail if she looked. That the audit would prove it. That whoever thought the cottage was a success had not, perhaps, considered how a success might be manufactured. The groom said nothing useful in response, but grooms rarely needed to. What mattered was who he would speak to next. Marian collected her package and walked home in the cold with her hands perfectly steady, which took some effort because she was, in fact, afraid. Not the hot fear of injustice, but the cold, precise fear of a person who knows they are looking at an adversary who has been thinking longer than they have. She spent 2 days reconstructing what Pharaoh must have done. The pieces were not difficult to find once she knew to look: a payments ledger that showed 3 years of property surplus redirected, in small amounts, through a series of transactions that, examined out of context, looked as though she had been systematically siphoning Ashmore estate income. Examined in context, her context, with her documentation, they were something else entirely. The funds had been redirected by Pharaoh into a commercial investment account held in a name 1 letter different from hers. 1 letter, the kind of difference a distracted eye misses and a careful one sees in an instant. Her father had spent a decade surveying property disputes arising from exactly this kind of substitution. She had grown up reading the shape of it. What she did not have was proof that Pharaoh had controlled the account. What she had was the account itself, the correspondence trail leading to it, and a theory. Theories were not the same as witnesses. She was going to need a witness. The note she sent the Duke on the Sunday was longer than her previous ones, and she signed it, for the first time, Marion, without the vein. She was not entirely sure why she had done that. She did not cross it out and rewrite the whole. She sent it as it was, and spent the evening with her hands very busy and her mind on other things. He came the next morning. He read the documents she laid before him in complete silence, the kind of silence that has weight and direction, and then he set down the final page with the careful precision of a man who is choosing between several responses and selecting the coldest one. He opened an account in your name, he said. 1 letter different. It would pass a rapid audit. Nothing about our audit will be rapid. He looked up. You knew for 2 days and did not come to me immediately. I needed to understand what I had before I said anything. She paused. I wanted to come to you with something useful, not with a suspicion. He looked at her steadily for a moment. Mrs. Barrow told me, he said, on Saturday, that you had not slept Friday night. She was concerned. Mrs. Barrow, Marion said, is occasionally somewhat liberal with the details of my domestic arrangements. She is devoted to you. He said it simply as an observation. The whole village appears to be devoted to you. They are practical people who know when help is genuine, and you are a practical person. He was quiet for a moment. Is that all you are, Marion? She had not yet sorted out what to do with the fact that he used her name as though it were already habitual. I find it useful to appear so, she said, which was honest and was also a door she was not yet willing to push fully open, and from the look on his face he knew both things. There is a man, he said, named Ashton, who has handled the personal accounts for the family for 30 years. He has never liked Pharaoh. I did not pay sufficient attention to that. He stood and gathered the documents, and she noticed he handled them the way he had handled her ledger, carefully, as though they were things that mattered. I need 3 more days. I need Pharaoh's own commercial account records, and I need one of the solicitor's men to confirm the signature trail. Do you trust me to have them? She considered the question and what it actually contained. I trust your interest in this matter aligns with mine, she said. Your Grace. Something in his face, a very small thing, almost imperceptible, shifted. You withdrew the name, he said. I did not feel the question warranted a first name. And what would? He said, which was not a question she expected, and she did not answer it, and he did not wait for an answer, and there was a moment of something that was almost laughter, and then he was gone. The 3 days were 7 days, because Ashton needed a full week to build the case to his satisfaction, and the November audit was now 3 days away. And on the 2nd of the 7 days, Marion was summoned to the park by a note from Pharaoh, not from the Duke, from Pharaoh, which was so extraordinary that she read it 3 times before she accepted that it said what it said. He wished to speak with her privately, on a matter of mutual benefit, before the audit commenced. He wished her to know that certain documentary questions might be resolved very quietly, without inconvenience to anyone, if they could reach an understanding. She wrote back that she would call at the park office at 10 o'clock in the morning. She did not mention the note to the Duke. She told Mrs. Barrow exactly where she was going and why, and told her that if she had not returned by noon, she was to send Potts to the park with that information. She noted that Potts, if sent on this errand, would make no small amount of noise about it. "Like a bull in a chapel," Mrs. Barrow said approvingly. "Precisely like a bull in a chapel," Marian agreed. Farrow's office at the park was a room that had organized itself to project the impression of honest labor, papers in tidy stacks, a fire burning, the desk clear except for a pair of spectacles and a cup of tea. He was standing when she entered, which was a politeness she noted and discounted. He was perhaps 50, with white hair and a face assembled over decades into an expression of steady friendliness that had nothing to do with his eyes, which were very pale and very still. He smiled at her the way a man smiles at a problem he believes he has already solved. "Lady Ashmore, thank you for coming." "Mr. Farrow." She sat without being invited, which she knew would irritate him and intended to. "Your note suggested urgency." "Not urgency. Clarity." He sat also, laced his fingers together on the desk, and used the voice that had served him well for 14 years, soft, reasonable, the voice of a man who finds the whole business slightly sad. "I have been reviewing the audit materials. I am concerned, as I imagine you are, that certain figures will require explanation, figures that might, to an eye accustomed to looking for fault, appear to suggest irregularity in the management of the cottage accounts. My accounts," she said, "are impeccable. Your copies are impeccable," he said. "Records of what was submitted and what was received can differ. People remember things differently. Intentions are not always legible." She looked at him. He looked at her. The fire made a small sound. "What is the understanding you propose?" she said. "Simply this." He moved one of the neat stacks of papers 1/4 of an inch, the hands never quite still. "The audit takes account of what is in the register. If certain materials do not reach the audit table, there is nothing to explain. The cottage endowment proceeds without complication. You continue your work, which is, I understand, genuinely excellent, without the unpleasantness of questions about funds redirected through accounts attached to your name." He spread his hands as though the whole thing were a gift. "This requires only your understanding that the estate management is a complex matter, that an experienced manager's judgment is valuable, and that a quiet resolution is better for everyone. Including you," she said. "Including me." He did not deny it. That, at least, was something. She held still for a moment, counting 3, 4, 5, not for calm, but for the appearance of consideration. "Mr. Farrow," she said, "I am going to say something that I want you to understand I mean precisely. I have no interest in the quiet resolution you describe. I have no interest in any arrangement that leaves falsified estate records intact and a dishonest man in a position to continue falsifying them. I am not going to consider it. I am not going to be convinced. And I want you to understand something else." She stood. "I came here because I wanted to look at you when you made this offer, so that I would know exactly what I was dealing with." The friendly expression did not waver. But his hands, she noticed, stopped moving. She thanked him for the tea she had not drunk and showed herself out, and walked home without hurrying, and sat in the kitchen garden for a while in the cold, watching the asparagus bed, thinking about the shape of what was coming and whether she was ready for it. She thought she was. She had been ready for things before. Wheels on gravel in the afternoon, the Duke's carriage arriving at the cottage gate. She met him in the garden, and before she could say anything about Pharaoh's meeting, he said, "I know." He came to me directly afterward, told me you had suggested the arrangement. She felt the cold of it very precisely. He told you I suggested a quiet resolution. He told me you were concerned about the audit findings. He said you asked him to speak with me on your behalf. The gray eyes gave nothing away. I told him I would discuss it with you. And now you are here, she said. Discussing it with me, yes. She made herself look at him with the same steadiness she brought to falsified measurements and drainage calculations and quarterly accounts in the dark. I went to him because he sent for me, she said, and because I wanted to know the shape of the offer before the audit, so I could document that it had been made. I refused it. I have witnesses to my departure time and my return, if that is useful. She paused. I did not suggest it. I would not suggest it. I think you know that, and I think you came here not because you believed him, but because you wanted to see my face when I told you. A silence. A very long one. A bird, a robin, she thought, very late for the season, began singing somewhere in the apple tree. He did not speak. Then, slowly, something in his face came undone from itself, the way a rope under extreme tension comes undone when the weight is finally lifted, and what was underneath was not the formal still expression of the past weeks, but something older and more tired and considerably more human. I am going to tell you a thing, he said, that I have told no one. I have debated whether to tell you, and I have decided that I have spent too much of this year making unilateral decisions about what to protect people from. He looked at the apple tree, not at her. The matter of Sylvie Renault, the settlement, it was not what it appeared. She was not. She was the sister of a man I owed a debt to, a man who died badly in the war in service to my family, and she had nothing. The East Wing and the establishment were the only way I could provide for her that she would accept without it being called charity. There was never. He stopped. It was not what it appeared. I should have told you. I told myself there was no reason to explain myself to a woman I had met twice. I find I was mistaken about the nature of my reasons. The robin continued to sing, indifferent to the moment. She thought about 3 years and a kitchen garden and quarterly accounts filed in order because precision was a comfort, and also because somewhere below the level of the practical, she had not wanted to give the estate back. I see, she said, which was not enough, but she was still arriving at the shape of what he'd said. There is also, he said, a thing I cannot yet tell you, about Pharaoh, about why he did this. I have a hypothesis that is not yet evidence. He looked at her directly. I am asking you to wait 3 days before the audit and to trust me to bring you what I find. She looked at him. She had made a contract with this man at 26 with no expectation of anything beyond terms clearly met. She had not planned on respect. She had certainly not planned on this. Whatever this was, standing in a kitchen garden in October with a robin in the tree and his hands at his sides and his face, for once entirely open. I will wait, she said. 3 days. He nodded, picked up a fallen apple, a bad one, soft, no good to anyone, and looked at it and set it down on the wall rather than throwing it away, which told her something about him she suspected she already knew. Then he went back up the hill, and she stood there a while longer, and the robin sang another verse, and the asparagus bed was perfectly edged. The 3rd day arrived, wearing the look of a winter morning that intends to make something final. Hard frost on the grass, a sky the color of pewter hammered thin, the trees stripped and standing like witnesses in a hall. Marian rose before light, dressed in her best practical gray wool, the one that said "I have come to work," not "I have come to be looked at," and reviewed her documents one final time before Mrs. Barrow brought tea and arranged herself in the doorway with the air of a general preparing for a campaign she intends to win. "Potts is coming," she said. "Ashton's man sent word last night. There is to be a meeting." "A meeting?" Marian looked at her over the teacup. "What sort of meeting?" "The sort, Mrs. Barrow said, with deep satisfaction, with witnesses." It was held in the great library at Ashmore Park, which Marian had seen once, from the inside of it, with its smell of beeswax and cold. Today it was warm, fires lit in both grates, the long table cleared and set with chairs. When she arrived, at the time indicated in the Duke's note, she found 5 people already present. Ashton himself, a neat, precise man of 60, with the eyes of someone who has spent a lifetime finding what documents conceal, a man she identified as the ducal solicitor from London, Mrs. Hatch from the inn, which was surprising, the village constable, which was less surprising than it would have been a week ago. And, seated in the far corner with his hands finally still, Pharaoh, the Duke, was standing when she entered. He did not come forward. He said, "Lady Ashmore, thank you for coming. Please sit wherever you are comfortable." Which was a sentence that meant something specific. She was not the subject of this proceeding. She sat beside Ashton, who gave her a look of professional collegial respect that she filed away as something she had not expected and would think about later. What followed was not a trial. There was no magistrate, no jury, no formal procedure. What it was precise. Ashton laid out the estate register discrepancies without preamble, tracing 6 quarters of adjusted figures in a voice that had the quality of a man reading from a set of numbers that require no drama because they are already damning. Pharaoh said nothing. His hands were flat on his knees. The Duke stood at the window with his back to the room, which was a choice she recognized. He was removing his face from the equation so that what happened would happen on its own terms. Then Ashton produced the commercial account records, not the account in the name adjacent to Marian's, the account behind that one. The one Pharaoh had opened in his own name in the first months of his tenure and had been using for 14 years, for purposes that had nothing to do with the Ashmore estate, and everything to do with the slow, quiet bleeding of small sums from 6 properties on the Duke's behalf. He had been doing this for so long and so carefully that the amounts were always below what would trigger a formal audit. What had triggered the formal audit was the introduction of a new party, a wife with impeccable accounts and a father's eye for falsified measurements, whose very precision had made the discrepancy between her books and Pharaoh's register too large to continue absorbing. She had not been the fraud's target. She had been its inconvenient obstacle. The Duke turned from the window. "Mr. Pharaoh," he said, "the account in your name shows withdrawals that match, exactly, the amounts absent from the estate register. I have a letter in your handwriting dated last March, directing funds from the estate property maintenance budget to a contractor who does not exist." He placed it on the table, in the light from the south window. "I am going to ask you a single question, and I would like you to consider your answer carefully. The letter is in your hand. We have your commercial account records. What we do not yet have is an explanation of how these funds were dispersed after you received them." Pharaoh looked at the letter. His face had, over the course of the morning, completed a slow transition from composed to exhausted to something else, not fear, precisely, but the expression of a man who has held something aloft for a very long time and is discovering the weight of deciding to set it down. He looked at the letter for a long time. Then he looked at his hands. The debt, he said, was 14 years old. His voice, for the first time in Marion's hearing, was not soft, or rather, it was soft in the way that things are soft when they have been held under pressure too long and are finally giving way. My brother's debt. I guaranteed it. When he died, the creditors came to me. I paid the first year from my own savings. The second year, he stopped. His hands turned over on his knees, palms up. One small gesture, an old private grief. That was the humanizing crack in the whole arrangement, not a calculating man presenting his defense, but a tired man who had been carrying something since before anyone here was watching. I thought I could make it back before anyone noticed. You could not, the Duke said, with no particular inflection. No, Mrs., Hatch said, from her corner. With the authority of a woman who has known everyone in this county for 40 years, you've been giving that story to people who might have helped you for 14 years and choosing instead to steal from a dead man's estate. You had a choice, Pharaoh. She said it the way she would say that the coach is late, without cruelty and without mercy. You made it. A silence fell of the particular kind that happens after a truth is spoken in a room. Marion looked at the Duke. He was looking at her. Something passed between them that she would not attempt to name in that room. She turned to address the group. I would like to propose something, she said, and she felt, rather than saw the slight movement beside her as Ashton turned, slightly surprised. Mr. Pharaoh's debt is a calculable sum. The amount taken from the estate over 14 years is a calculable sum. I would suggest that these numbers be set against each other and the remainder recovered, that Mr. Pharaoh be released from his position without public scandal and with sufficient reference to find work suited to his abilities, and that no further action be taken. She paused. His abilities are real. His judgment was not. Those are different matters, and I don't think ruining a man on the first is just because we are rightly angry about the second. The silence this time was different. The Duke said nothing. He was looking at her with an expression she still did not have a word for. Ashton said the number aloud. It was not small, but it was not ruinous, which was the relevant distinction. Pharaoh looked up. For the first time since she had entered the room, he looked directly at her. Why, he said. Because you were afraid and made a terrible choice, and you have been living with it for 14 years, she said simply. That seems like sufficient punishment. And because the innocent people who need references from this estate should not be made to suffer for your mistakes. She did not add, and because mercy is always a choice, and I intend to make it. She thought he heard it anyway. The agreement was drawn up by the solicitor before the party dispersed. Marion signed her name to it, with the second finger of her right hand, ink-stained as always, and felt the November audit resolve itself around her like a lock clicking home. She accepted Mrs. Hatch's hand and the constable's nod and Ashton's brief, warm, satisfied handshake. She did not look for the Duke. She started toward the door. Marion. She stopped. She turned. The room had emptied. She had not tracked exactly when, and he was standing by the south window with the gray winter light behind him and his working hands at his sides, and he looked like a man who has been rehearsing something and has decided to abandon the rehearsal. I owe you an apology, he said, for 3 years of practical absence and for telling myself it was appropriate. I owe you a number of other things that I have not yet organized into sentences. She stayed where she was. I am listening, she said. You said, when I asked if you were angry, that you were practical, that you had made a contract and you met it. He crossed the room until he was closer than he needed to be for a conversation, not so close as to overwhelm one. I want you to know that what I saw in those 3 years, in the accounts, in the drainage estimates, in the village, in the way you handle yourself when someone is trying to frighten you is not what I contracted for. I did not know what I was asking when I wrote that letter. I had no idea. He looked at her steadily. I have been managed by people my whole life. Every agreement, every arrangement, every negotiation. No one has ever simply waited and trusted me to deliver and then not looked surprised when I did. He looked away briefly, out the south window, and when he looked back, his face was the most unguarded she had ever seen it. "Marry me," he said, again, properly. "Marry me because you choose it. It is the only reason I will take." She looked at him. She thought about the apple tree and the asparagus bed and the robin singing in October, and the way he had set down the spoiled apple on the wall rather than throwing it away, and his hands, and his first and only joke, which had not happened yet, but she found she was now certain would, and which would be worth waiting for. She thought about a contract that had been the shape of her life for 3 years, and which had turned out to contain, unbeknownst to either party, something it had not been intended to. "You have a very strange way," she said, "of making practical arrangements." "I am learning," he said, "from someone with considerable expertise." "Yes," she said. "Ask me again in a year, when you have a better sense of what you are committing to." He looked at her for a very long time. Then he said, with the smallest smile she had yet seen from him, not the one that pulled back before arriving, but an actual one, a thing that changed his whole face, 1 year. "And then, I am asking." "1 year," she said, and handed him back the survey, and kept her father's handwriting, and the library smelled of beeswax and warm fires, and the robin, impossibly, was somewhere outside the window still. Pharaoh left the estate on the last day of November, with a reference, written by the Duke himself, and a sum that cleared the remaining portion of his brother's debt, and took a position with a property management firm in Bristol that never knew the particulars of his departure, and found him competent, careful, and admirably inclined to account for everything in writing. Ashton returned to London with the audit completed and the endowment certified, and wrote later that it had been one of the more interesting mornings of his professional life. Mrs. Hatch was, for reasons she never fully explained, given the standing arrangement for supplying the Park's kitchen with poultry, and found it agreeable. The constable found nothing else that required his attention that year, which suited him. Mrs. Barrow wept at the wedding, exactly as predicted, with great composure and no acknowledgement that she was doing it. The redeemable rival was, in this case, not a romantic one, but a professional one, the junior solicitor from London, who had initially expressed quiet skepticism about the Cottage accounts, and who, when shown the full documentation, had the grace to say he had been wrong, and to shake Marian's hand with genuine respect. He made partner 2 years later, and sent a gift. Potts repaired the north wall fence in the spring, and was paid fairly and promptly, and told anyone who asked that the Dower Cottage was the best managed property in 3 counties, and he had built enough walls to have an opinion. The lower field drainage was addressed in March for £38 and 6 shillings, and the yield improvement was visible by August. The redeemable rival, there was another, was the Duke's cousin, who had expected to inherit the estate management, and who, when the audit cleared and the endowment settled, and it became evident that the new arrangement was permanent, behaved with rather more dignity than might have been expected, and was given a proper stewardship of the northern holdings, which he managed adequately and without incident. The wedding was in the apple tree season, late October of the following year, very small, in the village church at Candlelight Cross, with Mrs. Barrow as witness and Potts as the other, and Mrs. Hatch as the third, because she was not going to be left out, and no one tried to argue. The apple tree produced, that year, a better apple than usual. No one claimed credit for it. The endowment held. The kitchen garden held. The asparagus bed was as well edged in the autumn of the year following the wedding as it had been in every autumn before. The accounts were impeccable. They had always been impeccable. Almost a year to the day after the library, Marian was in the kitchen garden in the morning when she heard wheels on the upper road, and she looked up without appearing to, and read the crest on the door, and did not pull up any stakes but set down her basket and walked to the gate instead. He came down the hill in the early morning light, and when he reached the gate he handed her a small surveyor's journal she recognized as her father's, a second one, found in the estate archive, not the lost one, but a different one, with drawings of the cottage grounds in autumn and notes in the careful notation, and she held it in both hands and did not say anything for a moment. 1 year, he said. She looked up at him. The light was the particular November light that comes after the last of the leaves, pale and clear and very clean. A robin was singing in the apple tree. She was almost certain it was the same one. You said, she said, when we stood here, that I had nowhere else to be. I recall. I have been reconsidering whether that remains accurate. And? He was leaning on the gate with an entirely new expression, the one that contained the joke, the one she had known was coming, the one that changed everything about his face. What is your assessment? She thought about the contract that had become something else, and the kitchen garden that had always been hers, and the robin that kept returning, and her father's handwriting in the journal, and the fact that she had been standing at this gate, in this light, for some time now, and had made no particular effort to be anywhere else. My assessment, she said, is that I have been managing this property for 4 years, and it would be inefficient to leave. Extraordinarily inefficient, he agreed. Yes, she said, meaning many things, and handed him back the journal to carry because her hands were full of the autumn's last cuttings, and opened the gate and let him in. If this story warmed you, if you found yourself counting the days to the audit, or watching for that first real smile, or hoping the apple tree would do better than its reputation, then you already know the kind of stories we keep here. This is the fire we sit beside, slow burn and patient, where the overlooked are always, eventually, seen. There is a chair here for you, and the kettle is always on. I would love to know, leave it in the comments, the moment you knew where Pharaoh's hands were pointing, or the line that stayed with you longest after the library. If you'd like to keep a place by this fire, we would be glad to have you stay. A subscription is simply the way of telling us the chair is yours. Sleep well, and may the ones who kept your lamp lit always know they did.